Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Raman, and we're going to be looking at starting a new unit today, which is Unit 7, and that's called the Sustainable Logistics Management. We're going to discuss this interesting topic of sustainable management using, a combination of PowerPoint presentation, a few YouTube videos which I've shortlisted, and I've included the links of that in the PowerPoint presentation. And also would then look at, covering some of the assessment criteria of the Learning Outcome 1 for this unit, wherein it talks about understanding the concept and theories of sustainable management. So let's dive into this particular unit. Now, what I want to be able to look at is from a, brief background. I want to look at primarily, setting a bit of a foundation in terms of why sustainability is important and what does the word sustainable actually mean. So when you look at the word sustainable, it actually means that you're trying to maintain certain things at a certain level or at a certain rate, depending on how you're mentioning or using this word in respects to time, cost, and quality. So if you're looking at quality, you're trying to maintain it at a certain level. If you're looking at improving quality, then you're looking at improving the rate at which some of the resources are used. And in some cases, when you're trying to, say, defend costs or basically reduce costs, then in this case, the meaning of the word sustainable would, also mean that you're trying to look at bringing operational efficiency by, reducing or defending costs in terms of, certain activities that you do related to logistics and, supply chain management. Now, the main aim of this unit is primarily to look at understanding, why sustainability is important now today in logistics and the area of transportation, and in general, when we look at different areas of transportation through rail freight, road, we look at air and sea freight. We will also look at why sustainability is important from an aspect of understanding, supply chain, and we look at it from an aspect of logistics, which is primarily to look at how businesses implement some of the best practices in order to, create more efficiency and productivity, and thereby reducing costs and improving quality when they employ the concept of sustainability. Now, this particular module actually focuses on different types of sustainable logistics. There are some key terms and terminology that we will study in this particular unit, and I'll come to that in a few minutes when we cover some of the slides. And then we are looking at focusing on, in the Learning Outcome 1, in particular, on the practices, different types of logistics, inbound and outbound, and what are the organizational practices, which most companies, I'm going to be taking up an example of Unilever, which use sustainability as a concept to, reduce their emissions on, say, for example, carbon footprint, greenhouse gases in general. Then we'll also look at understanding, what are the benefits of reverse logistics. This is one of the key, areas or issues or challenges which a lot of companies are today facing. So we'll discuss that in the subsequent learning outcomes, which is Learning Outcome 2 is basically focused on that, and it is primarily related to the subject area of returns. That means when you look at buying products from Amazon, eBay, a lot of these online retailers or retailers on the high street, when sometimes you have to look at this process of how a customer who has bought a good is then returning the good back, and then it is coming back into your warehouse or into your, storage and inventory facilities, would be the concept of, reverse logistics. So here we will look at, the advantages, disadvantages, the concept of how it originated, and what are the various things which companies look at for implementing this process within the organization. And last but not the least, sustainability, has become synonymous with the use of terms like, greenhouse gas emissions, reduction in terms of carbon footprint, recycling, waste management, and those are the bits that we will be looking at covering primarily when we look at the third learning outcome, which talks about how does sustainable logistics actually help in reducing the carbon footprint, the greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of, and reducing overall the environmental, impact of warehousing, logistics, and transportation, in this particular sector. So let's start off by, looking at a particular YouTube video, which kind of helps us understand the concept of sustainability within supply chain management, because I think from this particular unit, we would want to look at sustainability in logistics, sustainability in supply chain management, and the two concepts and the core terms we need to look at. And I think this video in particular best explains how this is achieved. So let's look at an introduction, and then we'll get on with some, detailed discussions using the PowerPoint slide.
What is sustainability, and how do we incorporate sustainability in supply chain management? Sustainability involves protecting the planet from degradation, sustainably managing its natural resources, and taking urgent action on climate change so that it can support the needs of the present and future generations. Corporate sustainability has been incorporated in transactions involving supplier selection and cooperation. This is because of the growing awareness that the environmental and social challenges associated with business operations along the supply chain can't be solved by individual companies, but through cooperation with business partners. Companies and their purchasing departments must tackle this challenge by working together with suppliers to ensure that environmental and social standards are maintained along the supply chain. Many suppliers are therefore requested by their clients to verify their compliance with certain environmental and social standards.
It takes a committed organization with a truly integrated supply chain and a company that can motivate supply chain partners to change. It takes a company willing to redesign successful products and services that may require advanced materials, modern manufacturing techniques and technologies, new distribution models, and modern packaging strategies. Supply chain managers must engage in environmental sustainability. We don't have a choice, as current supply chain management is depleting the earth of its natural resources and polluting the world through manufacturing and logistics and through the products that they manufacture.
How do we make our supply a green supply? Corporate environmental protection includes aspects such as implementation of environmental guidelines, recycling systems, pollution prevention, and barring unauthorized materials from products and production processes. Corporate climate protection includes aspects such as defining targets and measures for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Resource efficiency in the handling of materials, energy, and water requires the development and implementation of targets and measures for saving and recycling resources. Reduce, reuse, recycle. The use of hazardous substances requires careful identification, storage, and handling, as well as measures to reduce the use of toxic substances. Plant and transport security is concerned with authorizations and clearly regulating responsibilities, as well as the definition of clear instructions for specified normal operation of all installations.
6 steps for achieving a more sustainable supply chain. Improving supply chain in line with sustainability goals can help to conserve resources, cut costs, innovate products, and improve company values. The first step involves setting standards and regulations which need to be implemented, starting with the suppliers. Next, the company must identify and prioritize environmental and social challenges. The third step is to communicate expectations with written documents and set goals and targets, such as aiming to reduce packaging by 8. The fourth step is to develop assessments for suppliers and to make sure they are meeting standards and regularly following up on the assessment. The fifth step is to develop training programs and showcase the success stories of suppliers in order to encourage other suppliers. The final step is to strive for industry-wide collaboration.
In 2015, Starbucks converted a 240-hectare farm in Costa Rica into a global R&D center, testing farming equity practices and developing coffee varietals with increased productivity and disease resistance. In the short term, Starbucks aims to provide financing to its farming partners for coffee quality and sustainability. Starbucks' goal is to train 200,000 farmers by 2020. Medium-term efforts to adopt a climate change include Starbucks helping to fund the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. This aims to make coffee the world's first sustainable and agricultural product. A key goal of this challenge is to collectively provide 1 billion trees to coffee farmers around the world.
What are the advantages of creating a sustainable supply chain? Producing better products using fewer materials and less energy. In 2007, P&G planned to reduce road mileage travelled by trucks by 30% by 2015. This involves carefully planning routes, reducing energy usage, CO2 emissions, waste. A sustainable supply chain also helps in avoiding environmental regulators investigating the harmful environmental factors associated with your supply chain. Good environmental practices can act as a competitive advantage and also help in lobbying government to enact regulations on competitors to encourage change.
So as you would have seen that in this particular video, what we have looked at understanding is the general concept of sustainability and how this can be then applied within the area of supply chain and logistics in particular. Now, the video basically covered one particular example of Starbucks as an organization, wherein they are looking at using sustainability as one of the corporate tools in terms of strategy to be able to closely align their supply chain and the associated activities in terms of logistics, transportation, and thereby in turn reducing their carbon footprint and reducing these greenhouse gas production. Now, before I get into this, I've got one other video which I want to kind of quickly take you through with an example of understanding how Unilever to a certain extent actually looks at sustainability in terms of introducing this concept of sustainability in their value chain. So let's look at this small video as well, and these two videos will nicely lay down the foundation for us to study the learning outcome one.
A simple tea bag. Every year, consumers use millions of them. All of Unilever's products, including tea bags, go on a journey before and after they are enjoyed by our consumers. We call this the value chain. It works like this. First, we get the raw materials. Then we make them into a product and deliver it to a shop. Then our consumers buy it, use it, and eventually throw it away. But each step in the value chain also has an impact on the environment. Here at Unilever, we want to reduce that impact and grow our business at the same time. The value chain lets us see where our biggest impacts are, so that we can focus our efforts. So for example, Unilever's hundreds of factories only add up to 3% of our total greenhouse gas footprint. Around 26% of our impact comes from suppliers when they produce raw materials, and around 68% comes from the millions of consumers when they enjoy our products. So, most of Unilever's impacts aren't our problem, right? Wrong. We want to reduce the impact of our products before they enter and after they have left our factories. We work as a team with our suppliers, customers, and our consumers to reduce the impact of our products. We have ambitious plans to grow our business, but growth at any cost is not an option. We want to work to help consumers enjoy our products and cut the environmental impact at the same time. Every day, thousands of suppliers help us make our products, and 2 billion people use them. The maths is pretty simple. If we get ourselves, each of our suppliers, customers, and consumers to be a little more sustainable, these small actions will add up to a big difference. A really, really big difference.
So that gives us some background in terms of how we're going to be looking at understanding the concept of sustainability. So when we look at this in particular, let's now look into some of the slides which are put together, and they will discuss some of the key areas that we want to understand in terms of sustainable logistics, and some of the key concepts regards to learning outcome one. Now, let's look at summarizing this again. What is sustainable logistics? Now, the goal of sustainable logistics is to primarily improve profitability and reduce the environmental impact which an organization has from a long-term perspective. Now, that would mean that we are looking at basically 3 different things from an organizational point of view. Now, when we look at time, we look at cost, we look at economics in terms of how much does the company use in terms of raw material, what does it pay to secure or get that raw material, and what does it need in order for that raw material to be processed, and then finally a finished product rolls out from its factories. So when we look at that particular cost in general, what we are looking at is understanding the concept of sustainable logistics, wherein it considers 3 aspects from an organizational point of view. So these 3 aspects typically look at the economics of production or manufacturing for a company. In this case, I'm taking an example of and relating it to Unilever for the video which I showed. The environment in terms of what kind of constraint or what kind of an effect it has on the environment, And then last but not the least, how is the organizational socially responsible to create a system which actually works in the benefit of the people, for its employee staff people, when I say in terms of the environment, and in general about how it helps sustain or shave off costs in terms of profitability for the company. Now, I think throughout the duration of this particular course, we've been looking at certain aspects of understanding logistics. So why is logistics a key component? Now, in literal terms, if I have to look at recapping some of these things, which we have covered in some of the other units, especially Unit 3, which is International Transportation and Logistics, the whole system, if we have to literally define it, is basically from the, again referring to the video where Unilever looked at, if you consume if you consume tea and you use one of the products, which is a tea bag, from where it is sourced, how it is produced, to when it is a finished product and you're using it in your cup of tea, involves a certain amount of logistics in the background. So if you have to summarize this, in a way, literally saying from the factory to your teacup, there is a certain system which is worked in the background, which allows the raw material to be processed into a finished product, and that finished product landing onto your table or in your teacup. Now, with logistics, we look at the concept of procuring raw material and then creating or converting them into finished goods. And those finished goods then being delivered to the customer's doorstep would also be, some form of logistics. So from manufacturer to customer is also a form of logistics, or is a basic definition of the logistics system. Now, when we look at the broader meaning of logistics, and when we look at what are the various steps or processes which are involved, I think, there are a couple of them. And when we look at from the point of view of procurement of raw material, when we look at transportation of that raw material, from the transportation to the production floor, from the production floor converting into a finished good, from there transportation onwards to warehouse, and from warehousing onwards, transportation to the end customer's destination or the retail outlets, would all comprise this system. So there are various elements which get invoked at various points in time, and all these elements of different activities, if we say different elements or different activities, actually all comprise the logistics system. Now, at some stage, going back, why is this important for the company? Is because the costs at which the company is actually spending to buy the raw material and then finishing a finished product, creating or manufacturing a finished product, and then delivering it to the customer. Also, they are looking at a certain cost efficiency to be, realized. And when they look at that cost efficiency, it allows them to, create competitiveness and maybe generate more profits. Now, so all in all, this concept of logistics, and when we look at the whole process of sustainability at some stage, is related to time, quality, and cost for the company. So in some cases, when they're looking at improving quality, that means they're spending more time, and that means it is more cost going into research and development. But at some stage, when the product stabilizes or the product becomes a finished product and is in demand, then the cost being spent on research to improve, quality, or in terms of, the cost reductions in R&D actually lead to generation of higher profits, for the company. So at some stage, the whole system of logistics, and we combine that with the term sustainability, at some stage is to improve efficiency and to minimize costs for any organization. Now, we've understood what is logistics. We've understood the definition of word sustainability. Let's look at combining them together to understand what is sustainable logistics. And that is our, unit that we are actually focused on in terms of studying. So when we look at a system which basically helps minimize costs and creates operational efficiency for an organization, would be something synonymous of a sustainable logistics, definition or a system. So here, as per the definition, it talks about a logistics system which allows the management to integrate the key aspects of environment, people, and obviously raw material and resources, and then use them in a particular way, in a particular way to be able to minimize the impact on environment, thereby reducing costs and increasing, say, productivity or efficiency for the organization is the concept of sustainable logistics. Now, this works not on a short term, but in a medium to a long term basis, depending on the business or depending on, let's put it this way, the organization in which you are applying this. So when we look at this particular concept of sustainable logistics, we need to understand how do these companies then look at developing this and embedding this as a process within the organization. Because if it's a long-term plan, it is not something which a company can actually introduce and then implement and then achieve in a short period of time. So when we look at the Nestle's, some of the large FMCG companies that we talk about, Nestle, Kraft, Unilever, when they put plans in place, they put a 10-year, a 15-year, or a 20-year plan in place. And the reason why they have such long timelines is because in order for the company to derive benefits of putting all these, let's say, things into action requires, a long period of time. And in order for that to happen, for them to realize benefits in terms of, improving efficiency and minimizing costs, that is what, is the concept of sustainable development. Now, so a definition of this, if I look at, as per the World Commission on Economic, and Environmental Development, they define SD as a, concept, sustainable development, as a concept wherein the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So when we talk about conservation of resources, when we talk about conservation of water or some of the raw material which is utilized by companies to produce something, the idea here of sustainable development is that if we are cutting down trees, for example, as paper, paper manufacturing requires trees. So a lot of companies which are in the process of pulp manufacturing or paper manufacturing, basically what they are focused on is that in order to offset their carbon footprint, look at sustainable development or create their responsibilities towards an environment, at some stage they follow this concept and they follow this principle of sustainable development. So this involves, you're looking at, from a company standpoint of view, increasing the economic value in terms of profitability that you create by the process of manufacturing or production. At the same time, reducing the impact of the activities of the company on the environment, thereby improving the life of employees, partners, people involved in the supply chain, your suppliers, partners, and the whole idea is that when Unilever, say for example, Kraft, Nestle, all these big companies, they look at working on a certain product, fix a certain price. They look at what kind of margins with their partners and suppliers would make, what is the kind of facilities that they would need to look at providing so that their supply chain is integrated with the supply chain at Unilever, and it has a seamless transition in terms of helping them produce goods and services which customers buy. Now, with some of these slides, I'm going to try and detail them down into the concepts which are directly related to the unit, and also will help you lay down some foundation into understanding some of the key terminology related to learning outcome 1. Now, one of the concepts that we see in sustainable development, which has been borrowed from the accounting framework, the triple bottom line, or TBL as we call it, has become a part and parcel of when we talk about sustainable development. So here, the 3 Ps, they stand for planet, people, and profit. So from a environmental perspective, a business is supposed to have its obligation towards ensuring that they have their practices in terms of the organizational practices have minimal impact on the environment. They want to look at, obviously, a business or an organization is in the main aim of the business and organization is to make profits. It is to look at economics in terms of producing or providing goods and services to customers which make them profitable. So they look at that concept, and then the people in terms of partners, suppliers, employees, staff, anybody who works within that business, they are also looking at from a point of view of having some responsibilities towards that. Now, in between, this concept of sustainability comes in, and this triple bottom line, which is which addresses this relationship between the economics, the environment, and the social performance, which is basically the needs of the individuals, is referred to as triple bottom line. Now, this is a very basic model, but over the years, what has happened is that the TVL concept has been expanded. But here, we want to refer to it primarily from a concept that it is sometimes referred to within the discussions of sustainable development. And the idea here is that any business is looking to balance all these three different perspectives when they look at their medium to long-term strategy. So they want to minimize the impacts on the environment. They want to minimize the impact, of any detrimental impacts on the environment in particular, but also look at, ensuring that their responsibilities, which is towards, say, for example, being profitable, returning, wealth to its shareholders or stakeholders, are kept in mind in relation to, the three Ps which are included in this model. Now, we can address some of these from an economic point of view, environmental point of view, social point of view, and some of these issues is what we need to understand, for the assessment criteria 1.1. So from an economic standpoint of view, we are not only looking at, from an organizational point of view, just driving profits or look at minimizing costs. Here, the organization is looking at addressing the needs in terms of ensuring that the products and services they produce actually address some benefits which are related directly to or indirectly to environment and people. When we look at environmental issues, we are looking at, obviously, from a company standpoint of view, under their corporate social responsibility, one of the responsibility today tends to be sustainable development or sustainability in terms of utilization of resources, raw material, whether it's any kind of resource, whether it's financial, people resource, administrative infrastructure resource, but that is there, from a point of view of environmental resources, to be looking at minimizing carbon footprint, pollution, waste management, looking at recycling. So all those things come in. And when we look at it from a point of view of people or social issues, we are concerned about ensuring that when people work within factories or production facilities, they do not pose any singular threat to the health and safety of an individual or some of the output which is produced. When we look at, the production facilities do not create any harm in general to the environment or, from a climate change point of view. Now, there are lots of discussions about one of the things that we have read in the news and also seen primarily, on the TV, which is in terms of, say, carbon footprint, global warming. So some part of these aspects are all related to sustainable development. So as the resources are finite, there is this concept of sustainable development, which is now being applied within most large multinational organizations in order to ensure, because resources are limited or they are finite, and from that point of view, this concept of sustainability, which is a concept which comes under the corporate social responsibility, is becoming quite important for each and every organization to have in their corporate charter or in their vision and mission statement. Now, going back to sustainable logistics. Now, when we look at the key areas in terms of how they can be applied, and we look at the three, Ps, where we look at people, we look at planet, and we look at, economics or, the profit side of things. So social, environmental, and economic. So if we look at breaking some of the parameters down in terms of what are the key areas in which they can be applied. So when we look at economics, we look at quality, we will look at responsiveness, we look at cost and profit. In terms of environment, we will look at some of the other bits which are related to, understanding resource usage. We will look at, say, sometimes you look at, this particular new plant which is going to be created by, say, an X company. What kind of carbon footprint would it have? What kind of emissions would it, create in terms of a footprint? And in some cases, when we look at, what kind of waste management system or, disposal facilities would it require, or how eco-friendly, the plant is going to be in terms of utilization of resources and material. And when we look at social aspect of it, we're looking at it from a people's perspective, looking at any health and safety hazards. We're looking at what quality of life, what kind of, say, perks and benefits which the organization would provide, which would cater to the people's aspect of it, to ensure that they have an enjoyable and a working environment which basically not only cares for them, provides them the benefits which are required, but in the case of exigencies like accidents or other situations, how do companies have that aspect covered? So an example of this would be that in most organizations, when you look at the companies are required to have a public liability insurance. That means if anything is to happen within the premises and an employee gets injured, they are supposed to be covered under that liability insurance. And depending on the operations or the size of operations of a company, you will generally see that this liability insurance ranges from a minimum of 5 million, 10 million, 50 million upwards to depending on the requirements within an organization. Now, after having understood some of these concepts, it helps us to get into nicely to understand what are the issues around this particular concept of sustainability, which the organizations today face when we look at sustainability and cover it in conjunction with logistics, or when we look at sustainability and cover it in conjunction with transportation, which is related to generally goods and services. So if I have to just recap some of the slides that we've covered in terms of information, I would probably cover it by looking at, again, defining what is sustainable logistics. So here it is all about resource management as a process which allows the companies or organizations to create a logistics system which minimizes cost and looks at creating efficiency or improves efficiency in the long term. And that's the whole concept of sustainable logistics as a system. Now, the key components of when we talk about logistics, we talk about from procurement to onwards to manufacturing, production, then from there to warehousing, finally transportation and delivery to the end customer. And then last but not the least, the triple bottom line concept, which obviously most organizations have to keep in mind when we talk about sustainability in the context of logistics or in the context of transportation. Now, let's look at some of the clear aspects in terms of, what could be the issues which most organizations face today when we talk about, the concept of logistics, sustainable logistics and, transportation. Now, most ecologists would relate, some sort of, when we look at some issues right now related to logistics, they would look at talking about issues which, in this waste hierarchy pyramid, which I've put forward on the slide, talks about that how does the organization primarily look at reducing the concept of waste. Now, waste is something, if I look at a practical example now, when we talk about say waste management, we look at a lot of companies today look at recycling. A lot of companies today look at reusage. A lot of companies today look at disposing of certain types of waste products in a sustainable manner wherein they do not harm the environment. So here, the main goal is primarily to look at solving some of the environmental problems which are created by logistics in general. So when we look at some of these activities which are primarily involved in, say, let's look at transportation side of things. How do we look at reducing, say, when we look at a lot of transportation by road, by sea, by air freight, where we are looking at basically greenhouse emissions. So when we look at transportation, we are looking at the effects of reducing, or what are the issues that we face? Issues related to transportation or logistics are pollution in general, emission of greenhouse gases, and the amount of carbon footprint some of these manufacturing facilities or the transportation through logistics is actually creating for the environment. Now, some of the bits that we look at in terms of key issues which come up, and this is a second, just a one-odd slide, primarily looking at issues which get created because of logistics, and this is something that we will study in learning outcome 2 because we want to understand in detail the concept of reverse logistics. So here, one of the issues reverse logistics creates is that in some cases, reverse logistics is also called waste management. Now, the reason why this is called waste management is because it's an area wherein companies have to reduce, emissions look at reduction of waste which gets created because of returns which happen from consumers. Now, a simple example that we looked at in particular, when we talked about the first video that we saw, and in Starbucks, essentially a lot of people which consume coffee, they end up creating some sort of a waste. So when we look at reverse logistics, there's a bit of pressure on the company in order to reduce the amount of waste, which is the disposable, containers or glasses, which their consumers use after drinking the coffee, which are discarded into, the bins. So here there is an increasing interest, which the governments and obviously policymakers are asking the companies to look into is the concept of waste management. So here what they're saying is when the product is used, at some stage when it creates a bit of a waste, there is a morality in terms of the company being responsible for that, waste as well. So there's a growing interest among companies, which is to ensure that what they are producing at some stage, which is creating the waste, also needs to be looked into from a point of view of, reduction. So reverse logistics, if we look at the definition, is a process of planning, implementing, and controlling the efficient and cost-effective flow of raw materials, which either in the semi-finished, finished, or in the waste form, from a point of view of consumption, are related to the point of origin. And here is where the organization has the responsibility to recover the value or costs in terms of, which are required when we talk about reverse logistics. So look at the 2 billion tea bags, for example, which Unilever and its customers use, and they throw that tea bag away in the waste. So at some stage, there is a process where Unilever gets involved to look at reverse logistics so that the waste which is got created because of the usage of the tea bags or tea as a product is then not going to harm the environment. So some of the issues that we look at which are related to reverse logistics would be, again, disposal logistics. So the Starbucks coffee cups that you use, and if you buy a coffee, we have it, or you have a child latte, you buy it, you have it, and then you dispose of the cup. What we are looking at is here the cost of disposal of that cup and how it can be disposed of or recycled in a way wherein it creates very little impact on the environment is what we will look at in disposal logistics. Recirculation logistics, talks about basically the product and packaging which is continuously being, circulated when we talk about buying goods, repackaging goods, and then reselling them, and it goes from one, end of the chain to the other. So from a production or a manufacturer to a retailer to a warehouse, from warehouse to the retailer, and from there to the customer. Now, the other things that we look at is downcycling, which is the process of waste transformation into new products. So sometimes when you look at an important example of this, I would say would be under the concept of recycling. When we talk about in the UK, when you look at, there are different types of bins that we have 4 different colors of bins, and we dispose of some of these goods in different types of bins because this is to help companies like BIFA or companies like some of the companies which primarily look at managing waste management, to basically look at reusage of some of the materials or deriving value from the reuse of those materials, which reduces the impact on the environment, but also at the same time, utilizes some of the material which can be recycled to produce new goods. So when you look at the 4 types of bin, we have a eco bin, which is for generally garden waste. We have a bin which is primarily for plastics, bottles, and anything related to glass, and that is because it can be recycled or downcycled in terms of processing it and then creating new products or new materials from it. Plastics in particular, and then we have house waste. So when you look at the concept of downcycling, we are looking at some of the materials being used like plastics, bottles, and things like that being recycled or downcycled to be able to use and produce new goods would be the concept of downcycling. So at some stage, even when you look at let's look at companies which in the UK, for example, deal with water disposal. So you look at sewage water, you look at rivers, you look at canals, things like that. And the general companies which basically manage water coming into your house, and they also look at collection of water from your drains, which primarily is then processed first and then released into rivers, so that it doesn't have any harmful impact, with regards to anything in terms of chemicals that are being released into the river or the water ecosystem in general. So when you look at factories, that is the same case. When you look at chemical plants and factories, dye plants in particular, manufacturing plants in particular for clothes, where they use a lot of different types of chemicals, they have to ensure that anything which is released into the drainage of the water system does not cause any harm. And that is where, they look at managing waste or, the disposal of any sort of threats in terms of waste or toxic substances is done, and that is all under the concept of sustainable development. There's another thing that we also look at in terms of the issue. Before I go to the issues in general, one of the other things which has now emerged in the last few years is the concept of green logistics. And here, the green logistics approach is to look at minimizing the negative impact which logistics as a system, transportation, anything which is involved in logistics as a system has on the environment. So this term in particular has become quite significant, primarily because a lot of companies which actually operate and produce a lot of different types of goods and services. So large companies like Unilever, which are producing a lot of goods for grocery, a lot of goods for FMCG goods and things like that here, and they're operating in every sector of the market. They are now being asked to implement something called green logistics, which is to look at an end-to-end responsibility in terms of reducing their carbon footprint or reducing helping in reducing the greenhouse gases emission, because they they produce goods and services and provide them to customers wherein they have horizontal and vertical integration. That means they produce something from scratch, including the raw material, and their supply chains are so closely integrated with their producers that they then oversee. They are in the sense being asked to oversee the concept in terms of anything that they end up producing, they have responsibility for. And in this case, the concept of the green logistics as a concept is coming in, because the companies have been asked to take the onus of looking at protecting the environment or showing the need to care for the environment. Now let's look at going to the assessment criteria, which is looking at what are the various issues that get created because of transportation or logistics. So what are the various issues? So when we look at infrastructural issues which are related to transport in general, there are a few. So one of them is the high cost of building and maintaining roads. So because of the road freight and movement of goods by road, there's a lot of public funding which is required in order to build and maintain roads. So this is one of the reasons or one of the issues which, if it leads to degradation of, say, the infrastructure, then obviously there are additional costs in terms of, costs which a manufacturer could end up incurring, because it leads to a lot of wear and tear for the, trucks and other bits which are moving the goods and services through, using transportation of, by roads. In some cases, you will look at the emissions would increase. Sometimes you look at there are low capacity areas wherein obviously because of congestion, it creates a lot of pollution. So a lot of companies and a lot of cities in general, when we look at the infrastructure, have created the concept of ring roads. So if major transportation is to happen, they happen at out of hours office. That means in the late evenings or early mornings when there is less traffic congestion, there is less, chances of people being affected by pollution. So, or the creation of ring roads around the cities, which allows them to bypass the main cities in order to not have the causes and effects of pollution on general public. Safety methods, self-explanatory. When we look at sources of pollution, transportation is a major source of pollution, both in terms of noise, air quality. You look at light during some cases in the night, and then when we talk about, obviously problems related to, water. So in some cases, when we look at the let's look at the concept of the particles, suspended particles, when we look at air pollution, it can enter into our water ecosystem, and that could cause health problems in general for public. But the major cause here, or major issue, which logistics or within that the component of transportation causes, is primarily carbon emissions or greenhouse gases emission, which is happening because of the usage of road transport in general. Now, there are lots of other issues which transportation sector in general, when we look at, is following, and that is where the concept of sustainable development comes in. So when we look at traffic management, you look at a lot of motorways, which a lot of countries now and big cities have. So there is a traffic management system which is put in place, which basically are eyes and ears through cameras and other bits, wherein the traffic management can be done even sitting remotely in traffic management centers, or commands which have been created to monitor the flow of traffic to ensure that the emissions because of transportation are declining. One of the other things that we look at in general, which I would say would be the fact that there are some discussions happening that a lot of manufacturers are looking at phasing out petrol and diesel cars in general, which would reduce the carbon emission footprint in significantly most developing countries. So when you look at countries like India, China, US, and most European countries, where the most consumer transportation side of things happens through cars, in general is related to infrastructure issues, maintenance issues, and high traffic emissions, air, when we look at air quality in general, and it's all related to the greenhouse gas emissions, with regards to the transportation. Now, if we narrow it down to what we want to understand in terms of transportation and logistics in general, now here we are looking at some of the issues which a lot of companies look at grappling when you look at haulage companies which move a lot of goods between different destinations, from one warehouse to a collection center to a distribution center to a retail outlet. You're looking at the concept of transportation within logistics. So when we look at that, they calculate costs on the basis of cost of fuel. They look at government rules and regulations. Obviously, they look at environmental issues which are related to the emission norms which the vehicles have to conform to. They can't use a 10-year-old vehicle, or if it's creating a pollution or emitting more than what is actually required, which looks at them following the regulation which is laid down by the government. Now, in some cases, in some places, in some countries, when we look at it, could also lead or be related to something called shortage of skilled drivers, and the ability for these big large haulage companies to be able to retain people within their organization. Look at changing customer demands. So if you look at the emergence of e-commerce as an industry before 2000s, before Amazons and most of these big companies came about, most of us were actually purchasing goods by going to the retail store or the high street. But one of the key changes that we see, which has also led to a lot of contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, is primarily that we are able to buy things online today, and that means that you are able to then order deliveries to your doorstep. And this is a clear signal of how the change in customer demand has happened, wherein customers are expecting now the goods to be delivered to their doorstep. And obviously, in some cases, when you look at Amazon and some of the other companies in different countries, when you look at the providers, they are able to actually, have different prices for different types of delivery. So if you have Amazon Prime, that means next day delivery. You want a faster delivery, same day delivery. There are different, let's say, stratas which have got created in terms of costs. And this is again an example of how customer demands have changed. Obviously, how things are moving in a particular economy, rise in fall of prices, for example, fuel prices in general, inflationary, pressures in the economy also kind of drive, the prices, of products and services, and this is directly sometimes related to, transportation by road, rail, sea freight, and air in general. So certain goods, which are perishable goods, can only be transported through air travel. They won't probably be suitable for sea freight or road freight. They would probably use road transportation at some stage, but the cost of the good actually gets calculated from a haulage company point of view when they land up at the port or the docks. From there, it is the haulage company picks the goods up, brings it to a warehouse. From there, it goes to a distribution center, and finally to the retail outlet. So these are the issues that we look at in general, which can arise because of logistics and transportation, which is the first assessment criteria. So any questions on this so far, Sana?
Yes, I have one question. I wanted to ask about the reverse logistics. It was presented as a positive concept. Now, in my organization, whenever they give us incorrect regional forecast.
Yes.
And it is considered as a very a bad thing. It should not be done, and we are penalized on it. So because then we have to call back the warehouse. So I wanted to ask that is this a relative term or?
What is the related term, for example? I didn't understand because you broke in the middle, where your voice broke in the middle.
When we discussed reverse logistics, right?
Yes.
And we discussed it as a means of sustainability.
Right.
However, when I see in relation to my company, whenever regional demands are not accurate, then we have to perform reverse logistics, this entire term, and its meaning is entirely different from what I'm studying here. It is considered as a source of additional cost and additional, let's say, fuel consumption and everything. And so that's what I wanted to ask, that is reverse logistics the exact term for that process as well?
Yes, that is correct. But reverse logistics in this context, we are looking at from a point of view of one of the reasons why a lot of organizations, especially e-commerce and retailers, which do a delivery to the doorstep of the customer services, have to consider now as one of the big issues building up costs, not minimizing costs. It doesn't help the company in terms of actually looking at reducing costs, but it basically looks at the company actually increasing costs, because at some stage they have to look at also incorporating the cost the company has to spend in order to get the goods back if it's been shipped incorrectly, or in some cases it's being returned by the customer. So here, one of the things when we look at in reverse logistics, which is going to be covered in actually understanding the concept of how it is adding costs, and that is why one of the reasons why when companies are looking at planning, the transportation costs or anything related to logistics costs, they did not need to consider this. But because of the changing customer demands, this is something which now needs to be looked at, because it is something quite important for the companies in order to look at minimizing costs. So this is one of the key things that comes up in returns. When we look at inbound logistics and outbound logistics, it will become a bit more clear. So there are activities which the company actually does, which are predominantly related to the area of inbound and outbound logistics, but at some stage when the goods are being returned or they are coming back to the customer, it is actually a bit of penalization for the company, because the costs are increasing, the time spent on recovery, that cost also puts additional cost pressures on the company, and thereby so it is one of the issues rather than the reasons studying. So we look at understanding the concept of reverse logistics in learning outcome 2, but here the idea of putting it in the slide is primarily from a point of view of an issue. Okay. So let's get into, okay, no worries. Let's get into understanding and going into some more details about the second assessment criteria, which talks about inbound and outbound logistics. Now, when we talk about inbound logistics, what we are looking at understanding is the things which are actually coming in to the production or the manufacturing facility. So transportation, storage, delivery of goods which are required, and all the activities which are actually happening wherein it is coming into the company's purview. But when we look at outbound, it is primarily things which are finished products. So when we look at inbound, it could be raw material, it could be semi-finished goods which are coming in, and the activities around storage, delivery, transportation, repackaging, all would relate into inbound logistics. But anything which is going out as finished product or services to the customer or onwards to their customers like retailers or warehouses would then constitute something called, outbound logistics. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. And what we want to do is here differentiate the two concepts and understand where and how they are used. So inbound logistics is mostly related to, say, procurement, sourcing, purchasing, in some cases, raw material, goods and services which the company would actually use to create a finished product and then send it out to their customers, which could be retailers, distributors, control centers, warehouses, and things like that. Outbound logistics would be exact opposite, wherein some of the activities would be still common. Things like transportation, logistics, packaging, all those bits would be still common. But here, the activities are actually taking it from the manufacturer or the producer onwards to the customer or their buyer. So that would be the case in terms of saying something which is inbound, that means it's coming to me. Something which is outbound means going away from me. So when we look at this particular concept here, we want to look at differentiating the kind of activities which are involved in both these sides of the processes. So inbound mostly is sourcing, looking at order placement, dealing with vendors, partners, suppliers. At some stage when the material is ready, is sourced and is approved, it is then transported into their manufacturing facilities. You're receiving it and then basically using it as a raw material to produce a finished good. When we look at outbound, so here it originates from the customer placing an order, maybe the transmission happening if it's from a point of view of an online ordering, then it is being processed within the warehouse, being picked, packaged, transported, and finally going to the customer. So these two kind of images or diagrams essentially explain what is inbound versus outbound broadly in terms of the concept. Now, if you have to look at understanding the differences, there are key differences which basically would include things like in inbound, it is mostly utilization of resources and raw material in order for us to for the company to be able to create a finished product. And in terms of the outbound, it's primarily the focus is on the finished good or the product going from the firm to the consumer. That means delivery of the good when the order has been received from the producer, manufacturer, storage, warehouse, retail outlet, or whatever you whatever we say, onwards to the customer or consumer. So the inbound logistics, the operations and the interactions are primarily between the supplier partner and the company. In the outbound side, it is primarily between the company and the customer. So these are the two key differences when we look at understanding inbound logistics or the activity involved in inbound logistics and outbound logistics. Is that okay? So I think in terms of this particular aspect, it's crystal clear, and I think we need to just differentiate what are the different, what are the differences between the two when we look at inbound and outbound logistics. Now, going into something covering the third assessment criteria, which talks about different types of logistics providers. We come across these terms, which is called 3L and FPL or 4PL, third-party logistics or fourth-party logistics. Now, what are the key bits? So let's look at, I've created a bit of a few slides on this to look at these concepts from very basics. Now, when we look at third-party logistics and we look at fourth-party logistics, there's even something called fifth-party logistics, which is prevalent today. So let's look at understanding 4PL first. Now, 4PL is a concept wherein the basic infrastructure required to do logistics or transportation within a particular organization is in terms of its asset is not owned by the company. So when I look at Unilever as an example, I would talk about Unilever, using a lot of 3PL and 4PL. They have some basic equipment within the factory to transport the goods and material from production line to the finished storage and warehousing and things like that. But onwards from there,
I'm sorry, I can't see the slide. I'm really sorry for interrupting. I can't see the slide. This is key differences between inbound and outbound logistics.
I've gone on from there. So those key differences we have covered. We have gone on to the third one today. Assessment.
Yes, I know. Slide.
You might need to rest at your end, Sana, because you might need to refresh that at your end because the connectivity, it might not refresh at your end. I've unshared and shared the screen.
Is it at my end?
Yeah. It could be at your end because I've unshared and shared screen again. It should help refresh the slides at your end.
Okay, let me refresh.
Okay. The session is being recorded. So you'll get a copy of this recording just after. So what I've done now is the inbound and outbound we've covered, and here what we need to do fundamentally understand where does the concept of inbound logistics apply and where does the concept of outbound logistics apply. So literally speaking, inbound is between suppliers, partners and the company, and outbound is between customer and the company the goods are being sold. Now going to the last assessment criteria on this learning outcome, what we want to do is understand the differences or reasons why companies sometimes would use third-party logistic providers or fourth-party logistic providers. Now, what I was explaining very briefly earlier was the concept of 4PL actually arose wherein large companies did not actually own the assets which are required to transport or store or move goods which are finished goods and services from one location to the other or from one in terms of order fulfillment from a customer's perspective. So fourth-party logistics providers came up because they own the assets like trucks. You look at cranes and other material which is required in either moving the goods. When we look at haulage companies as a business when they came about, so a lot of companies do not want to get into transportation as a core business in terms of moving goods between different warehouses, different facilities and factories. So here is where they use the third-party or fourth-party logistics providers who are in the business of transportation or moving goods from one location to the other to help them do this particular side of the process. So here, a company like Unilever might not own its own asset in terms of trucks, vehicles, a transportation fleet, which is required to move goods from one factory to the warehouse and from warehouse to the retailer, from retailer onwards to different, storage and distribution centers. Now, fourth-party logistics providers were also named as lead logistic providers because they had a very broad role in the supply chain. Now, these companies came up as specialist companies or as haulage companies which are able to move goods of different types across different destinations, whether it's with national or international. So when we look at DHL, we look at UPS, we look at a lot of other companies, they sometimes can also be classified as third-party or fourth-party logistic providers because at what level they are being used to transport the goods and services to actually describe the level at which they are integrated into the overall supply chain of the organization. So broadly speaking, fourth-party, 4PL essentially do not own, in this case, when the companies use, they own their own assets in terms of trucks and warehouses. And Unilever as a company might use their trucks and assets and warehouses to be able to move their goods, store their goods, from time to time. And when we look at 3PL, this is, a term which obviously implies that the companies have some sort of control or overarching control on the assets which are used by these logistic providers to move their goods and services across various destinations, from warehouses to retailers or from production facilities, manufacturing facilities to onwards to distribution or warehousing centers. So here, the accountability also is with the company, and the accountability is with the company because at some stage the company is looking at reducing its overall logistics cost. So what they do is they outsource part of that operation to specialist companies which are able to help them save costs just primarily on the last mile, which is delivery either to the customer or in terms of the last mile of connectivity, which is to look at minimizing costs. And we cover this in reverse logistics as well, when returns happen from customers to the companies, and that is where they would use 3PL. Now 3PL, and if we have to put this in context of where does the term originate, we look at one-party logistics, two-party, three-party, and all that. So if I look at this with an example here, the first one talks about 1PL is basically a customer delivering it directly to the, producer delivering it directly to the customer. So a milkman coming to your house to deliver milk, for example, or when we go into the grocery store to buy something directly would be an example of first-party logistics. In some cases, if you have somebody delivering those to your house, and they are directly coming from the farm or the producer, would actually mean two-party logistics. Third would mean that here a company is employed by the producer or the manufacturer to be able to deliver these goods on a systematic, large-scale basis, and this is happening to multiple destinations. So this will become the concept of 3PL. And a 4PL would basically mean that a company is employed, and this company is employed which manages its subsidiaries in terms of other types of parties which are involved in delivery of those goods and services, but not only manages that and oversees the operation, but also has its own assets to ensure as a contingency plan that if a truck is to break down, then in some cases the third-party logistic providers, were not able to, put a contingency plan in place saying that, okay, if a large haulage truck which was transporting some goods has broken down, then a replacement or a recovery needs to be sent in, all the goods come back to the warehouse, and then it causes delays for the goods onwards to be delivered onto the customer. But here the 4PLs come in, and an example of that would be that they have their contingency plan. So if a breakage happens, it happens, say for example, a truck is to break down and this particular thing happens on a highway, then they are able to send a contingency plan. That means they have other assets that they put in place. When the truck goes, the material is reloaded and it goes onwards to the delivery location from there itself, rather than all the goods coming back to the warehouse. And when we look at the concept of 5-party or 5th-party logistics, here a logistics company manages the complete supply chain network from production to delivery for an organization. So if you look at a poultry farm, if a 5PL, a 5th-party logistics provider is being used to manage this, you will generally see that they are actually managing production, manufacturing, ensuring delivery and transportation all happening, when the entire process is then managed from a supply chain point of view, and that we call the 5th-party logistics. Now, in this particular task, we are looking at understanding how third-party logistics differs from 4th-party logistics. So now I'm going to focus on, with the one or two slides, understanding, what are third-party logistics providers. Now, 3PL, as a term, it came about in the 1970s, and here what happened was, for the first time in companies' production and logistics operation, a third organization got involved, wherein there was the addition of a shipper or a receiver or a carrier, which was then used as an outsourced service by the company to be able to transport goods from one location to the other, say from the manufacturing facility to the warehouse. So in this case, the third-party logistics provider does not take ownership of the goods being shipped. They just have the title. Transfer of title does not happen, and they basically play the role of an intermediary, wherein they are transporting goods from one location to the other. Now, in this case, a third-party logistics company could be moving goods for a manufacturer or a production company from one location to the other, and they would then be using different forms of transportation. It could be rail, sea, freight, air transport, road transport, and that is where they have then contracts in place, to be able to move goods accordingly as per the instructions of the producer or the manufacturer. So here, for example, if Unilever is to move, say, 100 tons of tea from one of their production facilities to another, location, they would need to, their own logistics team will need to have, some sort of contract with the rail company or with a haulage company and things like that. So here, what they do is they depend on a they basically sign a contract with the third-party logistics company, which will take the ownership of the goods, not the literal ownership, but will take the goods from one location to the other, and that is being done wherein they are going to manage insurance costs, transportation costs, delivery costs, delay costs, everything in terms of that will be managed. So today, a lot of companies actually use third-party suppliers or logistics providers to be able to move goods, parts, material from one location to the other, and this is done using the concept of 3PL. Now, in this case, a 3PL will not, the company will not have its own assets in terms of, the assets, things like warehouses, trucks, and other facilities. But the 3PL provider will have this as a specialist company who is able to move this around, organization. So in this case, what they do is, the reason why they're using this is because they're doing away with certain indirect costs which a company would need to spend in terms of storage, inventory, handling, equipment which is required to handle, and last but not the least, the transportation which is required from moving the goods from one location to the other. So this is done by a third-party logistics provider. Now, most 3PLs provide some information to the supply chain of the company. This information typically happens from the mediums of transportation, even warehousing and storage, cross-stocking, managing of inventory. So a lot of inventory management today, even within storage, when the inventory is stored within third-party warehouses with logistics companies, would be done through electronic tagging, RFID tagging or barcoding, and that is where accurate levels of inventory management or inventory tracking can actually be done. Some part of that also involves repackaging or packaging, which is happening. So an example of that would be Amazon, and I think in one of the units which I had shown a video of Amazon warehouse or a distribution center, what you get to see a customer ordering different types of goods, but the company has its own suppliers. When I say Amazon has its own suppliers, so they manage all the goods in their warehouse. But when one package has to go out to the customer, that involves the concept of packaging, and that is where again they at some stage would not look at they would have third-party logistics providers which will provide the last mile of connectivity, but the entire set of goods which have been ordered by the customer, say you ordered a projector or a stand or maybe some sort of a cream or anything, all of them will be packaged into one box, and that then will be delivered using a third-party logistics provider which is providing the last mile of connectivity from the Amazon distribution center to the customer's doorstep. Now, in the subsequent slide, I've put together some advantages and disadvantages of 3PL, and this will be followed by the advantages and disadvantages of 4PL, because we need to be able to discuss how 3PL is different from 4PL. Now, some of the clear benefits and advantages that we see why companies today use third-party logistics providers is that they want to look at, in general, minimizing costs which are involved in transportation, storage, warehousing, packaging, inventory transfer when it happens, when we talk about cross-stocking. So if your destination, if China is producing something, it is moving out from Shenzhen, it is going, its final destination, for example, is coming to the UK, but at some stage, if it's all being moved through sea freight, at some stage it will move by sea freight, but at some stage it will move by road from the factory. It might involve road transport, so there's a bit of cross-stocking which will happen, wherein the material at some stage would be transferable from the road transport or freight, if it's using rail onwards to the sea, ship, and from there it then comes onwards to to a particular say a port like Felixstowe, and from there onwards the destination would involve again the material being picked up and then resent to a warehouse where the company would have ordered it or they want it. So when we look at some of these activities which happen, which are provided by third-party logistics providers, we need to be able to differentiate what are the advantages, in which situations the company would use, and in which situations the company would not use. So the main reasons which come across of advantages would be costs, and when we look at the benefits of planning, when you look at a large-scale model when a company is buying a lot of goods, and services, or it's producing a lot of goods which are rolling out from the factory, there is a cost which is required to be calculated in terms of inventory, storage, transportation, and that is where the experts come in. So what they look at is, from a background point of view, experience point of view, they provide the expertise to be able to manage the movement of these goods in the most cost-effective manner. The other thing that they look at is they also free up some valuable time and capital, which is time in terms of resources for the production company, because they are specialists in terms of transportation and logistics. Now, they also, because they are in this field, they're also having the ability to be able to upscale or downscale the services required in order to move a particular product. So sometimes we do get to see that if an inventory for a company is not being sold, they would like to move that inventory from one location to the other, or stocks from one location to the other, because there's a demand of goods happening in that location. So rather than they do it themselves, they involve a third-party logistics company. When you look at large companies like Unilever, if they have to move stocks and inventory across different warehouses, retailers, and distribution centers, they tend to do it through third-party logistics providers. Now, some of the drawbacks of this could be negative pricing. That means sometimes even beyond the, when you look at busy seasons like Christmas and, holiday season in particular, when large movement of goods does happen because of shifts in consumer demand, you will generally see that this creates a bit of a negative pricing pressure on the product and the margins for a company, because if the products are not being sold, they try and rotate it across different warehouses, or in some cases they offer free deliveries, which would mean normally a company or a retailer would deliver within a 3-mile radius, but they are then asked to deliver in a larger radius in order to cover costs, because the cost of moving the goods from one location, one retailer to another retailer is prohibitive. And in this case, they don't prefer to do it themselves. They involve a third-party provider, which would mean they add up to costs in terms of time and cost in terms of the movement of those goods and material. And when we look at fourth-party logistics provider here in detail, what we understand is that they are used by organizations primarily when they want an integrated solution to manage the supply chain. So here, a 4PL would look managing not just one warehouse movement in one warehouse, but they will look at successive warehouses, successive facilities of a particular manufacturer or a production company, and they would be made responsible for ensuring that the movement of goods, whether it's across warehouses, whether it's transportation of goods across their storage facilities or distribution centers, whether it's inventory management, will all be taken care of by this particular provider, and that is where they have their own assets, contingency plans in place, and are able to provide equipment, services, and scalability, which is required to deal with the size of the operations, because they are providing a solution, not just in terms of transportation and logistics, but they are providing a solution to provide efficiency within the supply chain and operational side of things for a particular, manufacturer. So when we look at 3PL, a lot of companies look at it from a point of view short-term planning to medium-term planning. This as a concept originated in the 70s, 4PL originated in the mid-90s, and this generally is done when a manufacturer has gained significant traction, and sees a bit of responsibility within an organization to deal with quality, time, costs, and the material movement that the provider is able to provide, the fourth-party provider is able to provide, and that then tends to convert into some sort of contracts, long-term contracts, which are primarily done with companies, because there the company is focused on scalability, creating more demand, operations side of things, but the fourth-party logistics provider is more focused on managing warehouses, movement of goods between warehouses and different production facilities, and that is more of a supply chain operational management model rather than just the logistics and transportation model. So a 4PL relationship takes a longer time, and it is normally done from a long-term perspective as against the short-term perspective. So in this one or two particular slide, what we want to be able to look at is understand the differences between the two, when the companies would use a third-party logistics provider, and in which situations the company would use a fourth-party logistics provider. So when sometimes you look at movement of goods which are happening primarily in one location, and you own the assets, and the onus is on movement of goods only, not the transfer of ownership of the goods, then that will be generally using a 3PL or a third-party logistics provider. But when in some cases the transfer of ownership does not happen, but the company takes an end-to-end ownership for maintaining supply chain for an organization, that would involve, mostly a four-party logistics arrangement. 3PL are more focused on day-to-day operations. So an example here would be Amazon's warehouse doing the last mile of connectivity in terms of delivery of goods to the customer. So it is more day-to-day operations. 4PL is more focused on optimizing it from a supply chain perspective. So if an Amazon is to create a warehouse in a particular location, or rent a warehouse, or ask a provider to create warehousing facilities, would be on the basis of a structured demand, long-term planning, and that would mean that instead of investing costs directly, they are maybe sharing costs in terms of investment, or even asking an organization to create that facility for them, because they do see this as a long-term aspect of optimizing and having delivery options in a particular, or storage warehousing facilities to manage inventory in a particular location. 3PL generally tends to be, one of the 2 points of contact in the supply chain. That means you're either speaking to the supplier or you're speaking to the manufacturer. But in the case of, you might sometimes see a practical example of this would be that sometimes when you buy a particular good like a washing machine from a retail store, what will happen is you might be asked to call the retail store for service. But in some cases, the retail store might redirect you to say, can you contact the manufacturer directly or read the warranty manual or guidelines which are provided along with the product and reach the company directly. So here, sometimes you would see that the companies would employ a third party in the middle where the product is to be delivered for repairs, or they ask you to take it to a particular place where in a particular city they outsource that repair facility, and they coordinate all this repair, replacement, refund kind of situation. But when you look at fourth-party logistics, here you have a single point of contact. If anything is to happen, a call center kind of a facility might be put in, and that would mean that the provider who's managing the supply chain, whether it's from picking up from production, delivering to the customer, in between all the transactions, everything, whether it's faulty, replace, return, refund, is all done through the 4PL. So it has a larger integration with the manufacturing, production, or the producer in general who's producing the goods and services. In the third party, there is a difference in terms of the integration into the operation, wherein they're only focused on movement of goods and inventory, with regards to storage movement and storage movement and packaging of products to be able to deliver to customer. Whereas in the 4PL, they will be responsible for the whole supply chain. So that is where I'm probably end up this particular session, which talks about the differences between the third and fourth party logistics providers, and helps us cover the third assessment criteria for learning outcome 1. So I'm going to try and the presentation is already available, and along with that, what I've also done on Moodle is primarily added 2 links of the videos that I've shown initially for this particular learning outcome, just to understand the concept of sustainability, sustainable logistics and transportation, and they then can be assessed from Moodle. The other thing which I've also done is I've uploaded 1 or 2 small papers for you to study, kind of case studies or handouts, which will give you more substance into understanding the concept of sustainability around logistics and sustainability around transportation. So those 2 have been included on that side. What I want to do today is basically end this particular session by showing you a bit of a glimpse into the future in terms of how supply chain would look in the future when we talk about sustainable development and logistics. This is a video which is being created by KPMG, and it gives you a good insight into how things are shaping up in this particular sector.
With the increase in technology, the access to data, and making that available across your end-to-end network, what it might look like in 5 years' time is very different from today.
Products, workers, industrial assets will be connected. Collaborative robots will support the operator to work in a better and a safer way.
It's going to be enabled through technology, through ecosystems, through people and capabilities that only we can dream of at the moment.
The changes that we are seeing in the market are quite dramatic. And if organizations aren't looking for where disruption has come, they're going to be disrupted themselves.
I think historically, supply chain was relegated to being a back office support function. As we move forward, it's not just about having a great product or service, it's about delivering a great customer experience. Customers want choice, they want personalization, they want what they want, where they want it, when they want it, and all those have implications on the supply chain.
One of the key barriers to modernizing the supply chain is just understanding the digital technology landscape out there, whether that be blockchain or robotics or AI. But one of the biggest challenges our clients face is sorting through that noise.
Not asking which technology will be implemented, but which set of skills and competencies the supply chain will need to allow this vision of the future.
There's a huge amount of upskilling, knowledge transfer, different skills that are going to be required for supply chain professionals for the next 5 to 10 years.
An organization with a successful supply chain is well connected to its customers and using internal and external information flow that through end to end. So it can be very proactive in the way that it manages that to meet those customer needs.
The future supply chain will not be able to deliver all the competencies and capabilities itself. It will need to tap into an ecosystem of cloud providers, different technologies, and that's where it can leverage those skills, where it can supplement what their core capabilities are.
They're able to operate with all of their partners as one virtual organization with shared information, shared process, shared support. Those are the companies that are going to win.
So that gives you a glimpse in terms of why some of these companies would look at sustainable logistics management, because when we look at all companies which are now setting up bases in China and are manufacturing or have already set up base in China, a decade back, they transport all the goods sea freight. The reason why they do it is because it's sustainable for them from a cost perspective, from a long-term perspective, because they look at the idea of saving costs. There are certain companies, like when we look at large companies like Maersk in particular, these companies invest not just in assets, so they create and buy large sea freight ships, which basically transport containers. So they have a large management fleet within, say, ports, wherein the goods can be efficiently taken. Let's say they can be decommissioned, or when a ship arrives from there, they can be downloaded, and obviously fresh freight can actually be uploaded, and then onwards it goes on to its destination. So all these concepts that we look at, whichever company that we want to look at, which are in the process, which are in the business of actually moving goods or providing goods and services to consumers, retailers, different types of customers, partners, suppliers, consumers, they look at this concept of sustainable development or management of logistics, because it will help them reduce costs, it will help them build efficiencies, and with the with the corporate strategy or the corporate side of things coming into, which is the CSR side of things, one of the key areas which companies have been asked to focus is on sustainability. So if they have to uphold, maintain, or steadily maintain that rate of cost and base, they have to look at this particular concept seriously, and that is where we are going to be looking at studying the concept of sustainable logistics management. So any questions at this stage, feel free to ask me. Otherwise, I'm going to try and end session today, and then we'll catch up after tomorrow to cover the second outcome, when we're going to pick up reverse or return logistics as a practice.
Yes,